Keir is passionate about finding new ways to use digital to connect people to culture and place. He is currently the Chief Digital Officer at the National Film and Sound Archive. He's award-winning. He has collaborated on award-winning projects that blend the digital and the physical across the globe. And in 2018, he was named in Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business for this work. That's impressive. Here's Keir. You want to have a ring?
I know, I'll use that, yeah. Guruburi, or Yulma, where I come from, it's Yiriyongmang, which is like, hello, we're getting started. So I'll get started. I'd like to acknowledge we're on, you can see it through there, beautiful Ngunnawal country. I grew up on Gadigal Wongal, kind of where they meet, and my first concept, my first sort of proper understanding of country was with Uncle Jimmy Smith, and he talked about how the kind of the Bulya and the Bardu come together in the area where I grew up, which is sort of the mountain and the river. And so when I think about those stories and when I think about country, I think about this area that's sort of in the Kolo River, so north of Darug country, and I pay my respects to that place. That's a place that I go when I'm scared. It's a place I go when I need to be calm. That's the country that's in me, and I'm starting to get to know Ngunnawal country. It's new. It's 2 years living on this land, and it's not in me yet. I'm still kind of learning, I guess, learning what country has to teach. And then I go back, not this weekend, but next weekend, I go back to that Bardu and I swim in it, and I do that to get it in my body because it makes me feel connected to place. And I'm a digital guy. It's in my job title last decade or so. And digital work is rubbish if you don't place it. Yeah, anyway, words. So I'm going to talk about play and mixed reality, and I'm going to do it in a kind of museum setting. I mostly work in a museum setting. I just EGOT'd really recently, but it's the EGOT of the glam sector. I've now worked at a gallery, a library, an archive, and a museum. I'm about 6 months into the archive bit of that, but I'm comically proud of something that no one else cares about. Oh, no, glamour. I was an academic. I was a professor for a bit. Glamour, yes, or gleam even. Yes, fuck. I'm going to change that. I asked Kathy before I started, am I allowed to go fast and swear, or should I acknowledge the space that we made in the conversation at the end of the two talks just past and go a bit slower and make room for you all to kind of feel some of those feels? I'm going to go fast and swear. Are we good with that? All right, let's get into it. So I've been doing this stuff for ages. The first thing I did was in Germany. It was a project that was about technology, media. In particular, it was about decomposing television and then building it back up again, called Web of Life. Did a project as part of my PhD called Conversations, which was reenacting Ronald Ryan's escape from Pentridge Prison in a way that was immersive, 360, and depending on which way you happened to look when you were having that experience, you thought a different person killed him. I did a project with the Museum of Contemporary Art where we made a thing where you could kind of navigate the building before it existed. Did some other stuff and some more stuff. Anyway, so I've been working kind of on this sort of stuff for about 20 years, and I've got moderately good at it. It's super hard, and most of the stuff that we make, including myself, is trash, which is a bummer, but we're really good at film now, and we were terrible at it when we started, and we're pretty good at taking photos, but we were terrible when we started, and we're mostly rubbish at mixed reality, but we were terrible when we started, and we'll get good at it as a community. I'm also like weirdly famous for shouting, "Don't do VR," while also doing VR at the same time. And the director at SF MoMA, this was in Wellington, I was giving a keynote at National Digital Forum. The director at SF MoMA, who I had pitched a VR project to, said, and showed me someone's tweet. He's never been on Twitter before, so someone else gave it to him, said, "I'm not sure I'm going to back this, Keir. You've already told museums not to do VR." So I missed the bit which is don't do VR for the sake of it. That was implied. I'm getting on top of that. So the reason I said don't do VR is because mostly when we do mixed reality in a kind of cultural setting or in a kind of place setting, we get the metaphors wrong. We deserve better metaphors. So the first metaphor is the buffet. where everyone puts on a headset. Most of what you're eating is rubbish. It's not good for you. It's undifferentiated. There's no shared experience. This is mostly how people first interact with VR. So don't do that. Or it's the nightclub where you line up. It's one in, one out. You don't know why it's cool. You just know there's a line and you must get in the line and do the thing that everyone else is doing. And when you get inside, a little bit like a nightclub, like you feel like you're on your own and there's a lot of sound and noise. So don't do that. Or it's like the new cool restaurant where you've got to book 3 months in advance, so you've got to know someone. This project actually is not trash. It's incredible if you've had a chance to experience it. It was on at LACMA when I was working in San Francisco, and the wait was like 7 months to get in, or 3 months to get in. But just like a new restaurant, my director knew LACMA's director and got us in after hours. Because that's how it works, because it's still exclusive. Look at this fucking normative white guy. He's the one who gets to experience it, not the audience they had in mind. But again, don't do that. Or it's like home delivered, right? It's in your pocket, it's on your phone, you wear it on your face, computers on your face, who would have thought? Anyway, putting that aside, you can do this well. This is a thing that can be done well. Jeff Goldblum's in favour. And in this particular case, the thing that you were was that little robot. And so it was actually quite natural and appropriate to have a solo experience. You were like a robot in a VR world where you were trying to service a family. And it was discombobulating, but it was like a complete experience. There's new metaphors appearing, and they're slightly better. And they're ones that we developed at SF MoMA to try and address the rubbishness of doing mixed reality in a kind of museum setting. So the one we came up with, we called the lottery. So up on this big, it was a room almost exactly the same size as this. There was a whole number of weird and fantastical games you could play. There's a game called Everything where you can play as everything. So it's a video game and you can be a character, but you can also be a chair or a rock or the wall. You'd be Nathan. You could be the lectern. You can play as anything. There were other games that were performative. One of my favourite ones was a murder mystery game where you sat in a booth and you could choose where to move to, and a little curtain went across, and where you chose to go to, it opened up again, and the same actor, but with slightly different props on them, played the character you were interacting with, and you had to solve a crime. And you had about 40 minutes to do it. So it was a one-person performance for one audience member, and you had to solve the crime. It's phenomenal, amazing, weird, but not many people can do it at once. So what we did was, for this social VR experience, is that we gave everyone who wanted to have the experience, because you didn't need to have the experience, you could play with all the other cool things there, but if you did want to have the experience, you took a card. And if your card came up on the screen and you kind of waved it around, a kind of Sherpa, a digital Sherpa would come up and would take you into this enter room and you would have the VR experience. It was all kind of avant-garde mixed reality. And it was weird and it was great and it was fun and it was strange. And it was Erica's idea, again. A habit I'm trying to get out of as a normative white guy is claiming I thought of things that women thought of. This is Erica's idea. And we put it on when it was on the same time as the Game Developer Conference. So the Game Developer Conference in San Francisco is the biggest conference for video games on Earth. Like fully 10,000 people turn up. And so we wanted to create, because there's like literally that big block that's near is where the conference was, and the block that's on the far side is where SF MoMA was. So we're literally one park and a few cafes in between us, and we wanted to offer an alternative to the kind of megalopolis, Marvel-driven games that you were seeing. We wanted to offer something that was weirdly different. We gave people little vignettes from the art, and we commissioned artists to make VR artworks that you could co-inhabit with others, and we had a VR artist Sherpa inside the VR as well, who kind of navigated that journey with you. And the social part of it made it really gloriously embodied and fantastic. It's one of the most fun VR projects that I've been involved in. Probably what made it so fun was it was being co-developed by a queer artist from San Francisco in collaboration with someone from Miami. And one of the times we were testing, there was someone else in there, and they were like, "How are you in here? Where are you?" And we were like, "Oh, we're in San Francisco." He's like, "Oh my God, I'm in Miami." But we were there together, embodied, playing with this like amorphous work of art from other sides of the US, and it was one of those moments where like, you're like, oh, this is why we pay artists to do the things we can't do, because they do this to us. So then we did another project at SFMO where we worked with a startup called Ubiquity 6, who's now been bought by somebody else, can't remember. And a little bit like your project, you paint, but this one is collaborative. So you're building a sculpture together where you're colouring blocks and adding them and making this sculpture that's sat in the big atrium area of SF MoMA. And you'll know the sort of age and ethnic diversity of that audience. SF MoMA, just like the Museum of the National Gallery that I used to work for, really skews white folk and old folk. But once you make people allow to play in the space in a way that only works in that space, like the space is the trigger to interact, you can step inside Magritte, you can collaboratively sculptures, and all these audiences who actually think art galleries are not for them, art spaces are not for them, suddenly felt they could take ownership and build something in real time together. There was probably one of my favourite moments ever working in a museum. There's a line for people trying to get to coat check, and there was a portal into Magritte's mind that you had to walk through physically with your phone to get into Magritte's mind, and the line was in the way. And Erica, who I mentioned before, said, sorry, do you mind just stepping back? You're in another worldly portal and we just need to walk through where you're standing for this to make sense. And the person was like, oh, I just wanted to get rid of it. And we walked through, and when I looked around, because it's just two of us with a phone and a demo, all the people from the line were like, oh, I want to go in there. And we just had, it was incredible. And so finding ways to make art accessible is one of the goals of our institution. So this is the sort of people who turned up when we put, avant-garde mixed reality and startups together. The next thing we did, kind of the yes and for that, is that we proved to our colleagues at the art museum, the kind of legacy art museum, the Whitewall Art Museum, that audience actually do want to play with art. They want to be given that freedom. They want to be given that agency. And so there was a fantastic show called the fifth season of René Magritte's work. And René Magritte was straight up an augmented reality artist. He just had to use paint because we didn't have, iPhones and shit. The last room before you go into the gift shop, before you go into the gift shop, the last room of the exhibition were these things. So some of these Magritian portals were literally just glass. And some of them were like looks like glass, but it's actually a camera showing an echo of other things happening in space. And some of them were like full on, like proper, interactives. And in that one, you become the moon. We filmed this at the members opening. So look at the demographics of our membership community. I'll skip on from the end of the video. So again, so that I don't take credit for other people's ideas, this is the executive who was my boss at SF MoMA, and I asked him if we could do this, and he said yes. So this is thanks to him. Thanks, Chad. And it was a bit of a kind of shift. All of the reviews of the exhibition didn't quite know what to do with it. The people knew what to do with it. The audiences knew what to do with it. They loved that they could be allowed to play. But what was great was that when a young person, like an emerging art critic, someone under 30 wrote about it, she said, and we are finally allowed to play. Like, oh, thank God. Whereas the older art critics were like, what was all that about? Never do that again. So I like museums and digital. I like technology and culture, and I worked with Dr. Suze Anderson out of the US to write a book. And there's this bit in the book where we interviewed Sarah Kenderdine, who's Australian now in Europe, and Merite Sanderhoff, who's European, still in Europe. And she said this thing that is like, almost like the Cola River is now in my blood. these artworks were not created for my profession. So she's like a digital interpretation specialist. They were created for the diverse chaos of humanity. Having said that, I still believe that we should do everything in our power to ensure we have the context is there for the people who need it. And I think our job, our like digital superpower, is the yes and to place, and the yes and to culture, and the yes and to context. Those three projects all gave us ways of using technology to playfully add shape around so people could choose their own ways of interacting with those artistic practice without replacing the artistic practice, without putting it on top of it. It's a yes and. And I think of her every time I think of that. So the last thing I'm going to talk about, I've got 5 more minutes. The last thing I'm going to talk about is a project that Nathan and I did. So see what we're doing here? It's like Kathy's done programming, and all of the things I talked about is like the same. But anyway, programming. So I like doing projects where you get pushed into places you wouldn't otherwise go if you were allowed to do them yourself. So the National Gallery of Australia, where I used to work, started working with the School of Cybernetics, part of ANU, to make a thing based on a simple premise. We wanted to do a tour of the National Gallery, but you only went to places you're not allowed to go. And they said, that's a great idea, we'll fund it, but we need someone who doesn't think like either of us. And we'll get Boho Interactive to work with us to make this thing. So what did we do? So we start in the atrium. It's an untour. It's the hidden gallery. You put on headphones just like a normal tour. And not long after it starts, the tour guide has a terrible accident and runs away. And you are on your own. And crackly coming in is this disembodied voice who sets you challenges in order to unlock parts of the building. And you start in the atrium, but you don't go up those escalators. They actually break. They just stop working suddenly after he runs up them. And you walk down and then into back of house. We worked out the amount of people that we could have on each tour by how many people can fit in the goods lift. We stood in the goods lift with our colleagues and the head of OH&S and the head of preventative conservation and the head of security. And once we got everyone in, they were like, okay, as long as we keep it under 32, we're good. And what was amazing about this project, apart from that Yolandi came, and when she came, she was like, Keir, can you do some stuff for Uncharted, was that it allowed people to like see the gallery in a new light. And we created this entire story world. Every now and then, the guide would reappear, and every now and then you'd be tricked into tricking him and disappearing. And at the end, you kind of solve a riddle, and it's a riddle about how does the gallery live into the future. The voice, you realise by the end, is the voice of the gallery, and the questions you're asked about what you value, and the games that you're challenged with are the games that you play about seeing the gallery in a new light. And it's super fun. Actually, that's my children in the background. It's super fun. It worked across all ages. And my partner convinced my kids, 8 and 10, to come. They don't usually go to the gallery. They like to play in the sculpture garden. 5 minutes in, my daughter, who's very performative, said to me, oh, you didn't tell me this wouldn't be boring. This is fun. Breakthrough moment. That's the, 100 most innovative people. Fuck that. My daughter liked something I did. Anyway. And again, because, it sounds like this is my idea, it's not. This is Heather. She said I should do this. She paid for it. This is her idea as well. And one of the things that makes these sort of projects possible is the belief of an executive that you should do something that you're probably not meant to do. And all of the things that I've shared with you are only possible because someone trusted us to commission smarter artists than us to go into places that we don't naturally ourselves go. And so that you can end up in the last room of the Untour, in the pump room that drives the water into the Tyrrell within without, that smells like chlorine, that has lots of sharp objects everywhere you look. And while you're standing in there, kind of communing with the weirdness that is the engine room of the institution, having heard stories about the hidden flows of data, the hidden flows of power, the hidden flows of air, the hidden flows of influence, the hidden influences in the work of art themselves. You see the hidden flows of water. And while you're in there, kind of like a culmination of an hour-long kind of aesthetic and weirdly immersive journey, you hear a freaked out tour guide smash the door open and go, "How did you get in here? Did anyone touch anything?" And it's amazing. And everyone laughs and feels a bit sorry for him. And we bring you back inside the building and we secretly put a bar underneath the stairs and everyone has a drink together. So, thanks.